And thanks for joining us. Let's go in search of consequence. I'm sure you've heard already the Auditor General's report on the COVID-19 expenses and how we use the funds, right? We've talked a lot about it. But now that we've read it, the key question is, then what? Is a fundamental question. And that's what we've been attempting to answer tonight on PM Messages. Look, don't waste any time on this because you've read a bit of the details. But all I'm going to do for you is to isolate, synthesize, and help you appreciate some of the key numbers here. Right, if you look at the COVID-19 vaccine procurement that we are talking about, amount paid to, and this is one of the most controversial bits of this, at the time of COVID, we spent money to import vaccines. We paid the suppliers, UNICEF and Avast, a total of $120 million. We wanted a delivery of vaccines. They only delivered vaccines worth $38 million. They still have not delivered $81 million of the vaccines. The Health Ministry yesterday explained that this is because we don't have the capacity to store the vaccines, but also vaccine hesitancy, etc., have been the reasons why we have not taken delivery of this. And so this money currently is still one that we have spent without receiving the vaccine. So that's the one. And then we also talk about the amount mobilized in 2020 to deal with the COVID-19. And what we're trying to do is to give you a sense of what we find to be the discrepancy between the Finance Ministry's own accounting of how much they raised and what the Auditor General audited, right? And there's a discrepancy because the numbers are different. According to the Finance Ministry's own data, they mobilized 18.19 billion cedis in 2020. But the Auditor General only said they audited 19.11 billion. So there's a discrepancy here. I mean, how that came about, we still haven't had clarity on this. The Finance Ministry thankfully has issued a statement, but it doesn't resolve this particular discrepancy. So that's one to watch. And then we also find that in spite of this, the Auditor General did not audit all the sources of funding that we got to mitigate the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic. So the Auditor General audited 6 sources, okay? However, the Finance Ministry got money from a total of 9 sources, which means the Auditor General did not audit the Korea funding that came in from Korea, didn't audit funding that came in from Germany, and did not audit funding that came in from the government of Ghana's own monies that were made available to fund it and mitigate the impact. And so this is outstanding and hasn't been audited. The question is, what is the Auditor General going to find if he chooses to do so? But also key question, why didn't the Auditor General audit these 3 as well? So fundamental question that we'll put, say, to Daniel Domelevo. He's been there before. So how did the Auditor General miss these 3 sources? He's joining me. He will answer some questions quickly on this as well. And then these are the various funding sources and how much we got in total. The IMF, the World Bank, the European Union, and we are talking about this is the sources that we know are available according to the mid-year budget review. So you see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 sources in all, a total of 25.68 billion cedis that we got in total according to the budget. And then you begin to see a discrepancy also in the total amount that the Auditor General audited, as in 21 billion, but the budget says we mobilized a total of 25 billion. So that tells you they are outstanding. And then look at the amount utilized in 2020 and 2021. You see the Auditor General talks about 12.23. The ministry talks about 12.04. I mean, yeah, a tiny bit of numbers, but it matters. So we are highlighting the utilization of the contingency fund. These are the host of things that was used on, fund was used to pay a host of things, allowances to frontline workers, etc. Right? And then you look at the utilization of the BOG's own bonds. Bonds were issued. Those bonds are now going to be subject to the domestic debt exchange, right? People bought those bonds, institutions and individuals bought those bonds, so we can help you use that money, to deal with the COVID. And, that's what the money was used for in the end. And then you look at the IMF Rapid Credit Facility that also came in. This is what they used for liability management, district assemblies, common fund, etc. in that same period that they got the money. Construction of 88, 88 district hospitals as one. But I find this curious, though. Why they use the money to pay NAPCO second quarter allocation? NAPCO. Why were you using COVID alleviation money to pay NAPCO trainees? It's one of the things that questions need to be answered about. Utilization of the World Bank money also came in. We use this for a host of things, including medical equipment, cleaning materials, consultancy, storage facility, construction, etc. And then if you look at the budget, other findings, and this is one of the most controversial bits, right? We spent $607,000 paid out to of this 4 million contract for the supply of 26 Toyota Hayes Deluxe ambulances. In the end, the contract was signed on the 5th of December, right? And the ambulances were to be delivered by the 15th of January. As we speak currently, no ambulance have been delivered at all as of the 28th of November last year. And so we need clarity on that as well. And then we also know that the Ministry of Information paid themselves a total amount of 151,000 plus risk allowance, and this was contrary to the risk allowance directives and without approval from the Office of the Chief of Staff as well. This has to be retrieved according to the Auditor General as well. And then according to the Ministry, again, 53.8% and 46.2% spent on direct COVID-19 interventions and for general budget support, respectively, were consistent with a mandate approved by Parliament as well. So what about the outstanding key areas? And the Ministry makes the point in the statement that I'm holding with me right now that I'll go to quickly, because there are some issues that have come up in this statement, because this is just coming in the last 3 hours or so from the Finance Ministry trying to explain the issues involved in the Auditor General's investigations. I want to bring in right now my guest, Daniel Yao Domelevo. He's a former Auditor General. You know him on this, joins us right now. Dr. Kwame Aselu Sapon is a pharmacist and research fellow at the CDD. And Kwabena Minta Kando is a ranking member on Health Committee of Parliament and MP for Draboso. And all of them joining me on Zoom. I want to quickly start with Daniel Domelevo, who is joining us right now. Mr. Domelevo, so in the last couple of hours, the Finance Ministry has a statement. And I want to read to you the essential part of the statement and give me your quick response to that. This is the very latest on this, and I know you've already seen the Auditor General's report. This is what the Finance Ministry says in the statement that had come up. It says, the Ministry welcomes the Auditor General's report and wishes to assure the public that steps are being taken to address all issues. The following interventions are currently being pursued by the Ministry. A, meetings are being organized to engage with the implementing agencies to evaluate actions taken to implement the audit recommendations in the audit report. So they are holding meetings right now with the agencies to implement the audit report recommendations. And then B, preparations of an emergency expenditure management guideline. And this guideline will provide government with administrative protocols in times of emergency, because as we were dealing with this COVID pandemic, we didn't have emergency guidelines on how to spend. Give me your reaction to these two key action points the Finance Ministry says they are pursuing on the back of the revelations in the Auditor General's report.
Thank you very much, Evans. And let me say that these two actions are good, that the government itself is trying to remedy some of the infractions that have been cited in the audit report. But the question I would like to ask the Ministry of Finance is that when the audit was carried out, were there no audit observations on the field? Were the attention not drawn to these issues? When the audit was completed, did the Auditor General not issue a management letter to them, telling them about all these things? Is it when the public started, when there is public outcry, now that they are telling us that they are meeting these institutions? So it tells you the seriousness with which the Ministry of Finance and the government take the audit report. From my point of view, these issues should have been resolved by now, because on the 5th, the auditors raised observations. So that brings the infractions to the notice of the Ministry of Finance That is if they claim they are not aware. So from that time, this issue should have been resolved. It's not today that they will not tell us that they are setting up a committee and meeting with other people, other ministries to see the status of implementation. I don't think you will handle your finances like that. Listening to you, I get sad, especially when you borrow money from people saying that I don't have money to take care of a pandemic. And then you use the money to pay SNIT, use some to pay NADCO, etc. Are those all part of the pandemic? So you see the government itself is at the forefront of misbehavior or breaching laws and not respecting the financial rules. So are you surprised that we have this level of embezzlement and infractions in the Auditor General's report, when even the Ministry of Finance and the government, who should be at the forefront and ensuring that the financial rules are complied with, are misbehaving, for lack of better words? What will others do? So it is a welcoming attempt that they are putting in place, but to me, it's a bit late. Yeah. And they should take audit reports a bit more seriously.
And Daniel Domelevo, you make that point, and I noticed that in the report, each of the infractions and irregularities, the auditors sought to get the responses from those who had been mentioned. And in many of the cases, responses were given, right? And so your point is that when those issues were flagged with the Finance Ministry and its agencies, what did they do about it at that time? That's the point you're making?
Exactly. And you notice from the Auditor General's point of view, they were only giving explanations, but they were not solving the problems. I'm sure because of the public outcry, now that they are thinking of solving the problems.
Yeah, I mean, so where we stand now, and I theme this in search of consequence. Often, even when you were there, we have all these jaw-dropping revelations in Auditor General's report. This is one of them. This is the latest of them. What should happen now?
Well, I think a lot of things can happen, and I'm expecting them to happen. First and foremost, I expect the Auditor General to comply with Article 1A7 Clause 7B, which requires him that anytime he comes across expenditures that are contrary to law, he should disallow and surcharge. So I expect the Auditor General to do that. Two, the report goes to Parliament, and I expect that the Parliament should not delay on the report. They should refer it quickly to the Public Accounts Committee, and the Public Accounts Committee should call the various audited institutions to book to ensure that the right thing is done. I also think that the issues that border on criminality, the Auditor General should liaise with the Office of the Special Prosecutor so that we can take those people on immediately. It beats my mind in a country whereby when we meet petty thieves, people who steal bananas, they steal goat, etc., we sentence them to several years. And if we meet public officers who steal money belonging to all of us, as a result of which our systems are not working, hospitals are not functioning, schools are not good, our roads are bad, all that we do is just to report it in the audit report. At best, we may collect the money and they are free. So I think there must be consequences. And the Attorney General may also like to step in here to help prosecute some of these people if his office has the space to do this.
Mr. Domelevo, considering that we were dealing with a crisis that we haven't dealt before, it was an emergency we didn't anticipate, we were plunged into it. Considering that circumstance, isn't there room to say that we spent the way we did, there were these infractions, because we're dealing with an unprecedented situation that then demanded that we spend in a manner that, again, it was an emergency and lives were at stake. So all the accountability processes, we almost suspended it. Isn't that a reasonable justification to explain away why we did what we did and some of the monies, we can't account for and the question that Dr. General has raised?
Not at all. Whenever there is an emergency, Evans, I know that we suspend some of the rules. Unfortunately, Ghana as a country, we have not come out with those financial management rules to address emergency situations. I think lessons will be learned from this, and they will develop that. I hear there's a manual being prepared now for that.
Yeah.
But then the government or the Ministry of Finance or those who were in charge just took advantage of the emergency to misbehave. For instance, the payment of the NADCO, is that part of the emergency? The payment of SNIT, listen, when you go and borrow money and say, let me use it to address emergency, and you used to go and pay SNIT, you used to pay gate fund, etc., is that emergency? So it's just like, for instance, you telling me that, just for the purpose of an example, people in your office are all sick, so you need some money to send them to hospital. Immediately I give you the money, you used to go and buy a car, and say because there was emergency, there's justification for it. So there was blatant violation of the rules, and this is deliberate. I don't buy the argument that because there was emergency, expenditures which did not even qualify for the emergency or come under the emergency could be met out of the emergency fund.
And finally, you've mentioned that beyond the surcharge and disallowance, the Auditor General should consider cooperating or collaborating with the Special Prosecutor to pursue the criminal aspects of this. Wouldn't that be overstepping the limits of the Auditor General?
Not at all. If you read the Office of the Special Prosecutor Act, there's a provision in there requesting that Auditor General can refer his findings which border on criminality to the OSP. So it is part of the legal mandate of the Auditor General and the OSP. Okay. I hope you remember that there was collaboration between the Office of the Auditor General and OSP when I was in office. It is because of that provision.
So you worked with the OSP when you were there on issues?
Oh yes, there was collaboration between myself and the OSP at the time. Okay. And I actually made sure that anytime the OSP needed to investigate some things which bordered on financial management aspect, he called on me and we did it for him. I cannot disclose what we did for him, but there were several instances that we collaborated.
Daniel Demelevo, thank you very much. And Daniel Demelevo will take leave of us right now. I'm grateful that he joined us with his thoughts. I'm going to take a quick break. But before I do that, let me take quick thoughts from my two guests. Very, very brief thoughts, and I'll come back and expand on that with them. Dr. Kwame Sapon-Asiru, let me ask you, do you agree that the Special Prosecutor should take an interest in this matter? Please unmute for me.
Yes. Evans, at the end of the day, it's our money. And when our money is spent, it has to be spent appropriately. If it's not spent appropriately, the Constitution and our laws allow state institutions to investigate. And when culpability is found, for actions to be exacted. The Special Prosecutor is part of these state institutions. So if you ask me if I agree, it's a no-brainer. Because anyone who's read the audit report would be naive to think that these things happened because of an emergency. Like Daniel Demelevo said, you cannot tell me you went to pay for SNIT or NADCO in an emergency from an emergency fund. You cannot tell me you paid for the construction of an isolation center for 4.5 million that was never built, and you didn't follow up because it was an emergency. There are certain things in that report that just don't make sense. And I'll go back to what I said when I was initially spoken to about this report. It comes across as the state put a facade in front of all of us and just broke the law. And in breaking the law, they plundered the state. There's nothing else I can say apart from that. And I would end quickly because you said opening remarks.
Yeah.
By saying, if you read the finance ministry's statement,
And I'm going to come to that after the break. We'll go into that statement. In fact, we'll start with that.
I'm looking at it briefly.
Okay.
I consider it as English. Basically, what they are telling us is Parliament approved that we can do this, and we did it. True, Parliament may have approved it, but in doing so, have you addressed in that letter all the infractions that took place, all the breaches of the laws that took place, all the misappropriations that took place? How can you just write to me? And I say me because I'm a taxpayer. You write to me and tell me, because Parliament allowed me to do this, I just went out and I did it without consideration for anything else. And now I am speaking to the implementing organizations to see how we can correct our anomalies. It's like what we say in our colloquial parlance. We are working on it. Things are far advanced. It's in the pipeline. That's all they told us. That letter is English. And it makes me more angry because it's like they don't even get it, that they wasted our money. And that's why I leave it, because I'll go down into the bonds they sold, why we are IMF, but I'll leave it at this point. Basically, they have written English to us, and they expect us to accept English as an explanation for massive infractions that your station has actually serialized and gone into it and said, we could have sent at least 1 billion cedis. And if you, as a private organization, can tell me you could have saved 1 billion cedis, why would I accept the finance ministry, who is the exchequer, who's supposed to hold my money in trust, writing English to me?
We're going to dissect that statement when we return, because there's a lot more in there that we'll take line by line and examine. And then we'll talk about that search for consequence. We've heard from Demolovo's own suggestions. He says the two institutions, one must start actively looking into prosecuting people. The OSP has been charged already. He said he did it with the OSP. I get a sense that he says the OSP must initiate this and must take an interest in this. We'll get into that when we return from this break. Stay with us. Thank you very much for staying with us. I still have with me Kwame Sapon-Sedu, who is a pharmacist and research fellow. We'll be joined shortly by the minority spokesperson on health and the ranking on the Health Committee in Parliament. Kwame Sapon-Sedu, let's get into the details of this statement. Now we're getting some clarity from the Finance Ministry. And I start with one of the key things that they talk about, that the ministry wishes to provide the following clarity, right? The first, that the audit report confirms total resources mobilized for the COVID-19 response over the period March 2020 to June 2023, keeping them honest, Kwame. That, as I indicated, from the ministry's own budget, when the ministry says in this statement that confirms total resources mobilized, it does not agree with their own budget account, as in the accounting they gave in the budget of 2023. Because in that budget, as I said in my presentation, there are 3 additional sources that the Auditor General did not audit. And I mentioned them: the one from Germany, the one from Korea, and some other funding from the government of Ghana. So what do you make of that particular line then? And I know you've also been following this very keenly. On the face of it, this claim that it is a confirmation of the total resources mobilized appears to contradict the Finance Ministry's own budget details.
Evans, that's false. It is false because in your own introduction, there's a disparity between 21 and 25 million. And that disparity probably can be accounted for by the other sources of funding that were not accounted for or audited by the Auditor General. But why do I emphasize that it is false? I emphasize that it is false because they are too much in a hurry to try and justify that nothing went wrong. And so they are not even looking at their own documentations that have been presented to Parliament and are in the Hansard, which are in disparity to what the Auditor General has presented. And they forget that the Auditor General can account for his disparity with the Hansard from the fact that he acknowledges he didn't audit certain sources of funding.
In fact, 6 sources of funding, to be very specific.
Yes. So if they then say that, 53.8 and 46.2 supports what we've said all along, that's a lie. Because in actual fact, that's not what they presented to Parliament. They are trying to rely on the audit to justify their current position. And then I ask myself, you remember when you first called me a couple of days ago on this, I said, let's go back to a conversation I had with John Kumar and Expenditure on Newsfire, where I reminded John Kumar that in actual fact, allow Expenditure to push his argument, because his argument makes the government look better than how badly you have spent our COVID funds. Now they are trying to agree with those statements that were made by John Kumar on Newsfire, when in actual fact, the truth is what they presented in the budget. And the truth is corroborated by the fact that the Auditor General acknowledges that he didn't audit those sources of funding. So the question I ask myself is, what are the anomalies in those sources of funding that haven't been audited? And how grievous would the findings of the Auditor General become should they decide or should they have to audit these sources of funding? And Evans, I say so because this government has touted we are at the IMF because of the Russia-Ukraine war and COVID. If these are the egregious anomalies in the expenditure, I ask myself, are we really in this precarious situation because of COVID? No. I go back to say COVID gave us a bounty, because anyone who's read the African Development Fund report says that they told us in 2019 that in fact our bonds were junk. But we are being told that the very thing, which was the pandemic, which gave us enough money for us to remedy our junk status as of 2019, is the reason why we are in the pits. And like I always say, when you are in the pit, stop digging. Unfortunately, this government has gotten itself a group of beavers who are busy digging and damming rivers to try and prevent anyone from seeing how badly they manage these funds. But the truth of the matter is, we have laws in this land, we have state institutions, and just as the Auditor General has shown from all the other things, I'm quite sure that one day the other 6 sources will be audited and we'll see the real size of the dead toad.
Let's stay with that point. Let's stay with that point, because the Parliament, from what I understand, when they resume on the 7th, will begin a public hearing. I want to bring in the ranking member on the Health Committee in Parliament, Mr. Akando, into the conversation. Mr. Akando, I'm referring to a document that is already before Parliament, which is the budget. The Minister of Finance tried to account for the use of the COVID expenditure. there are 9 sources stated in that budget document. The Auditor General has audited 6 of those sources, so there are 3 outstanding. The Korea funding, that of Germany, and bits also from the BOG. Will your committee look into all 9 sources when you begin hearing?
Thank you very much, Evans. Evans, I think that what the Auditor General has done is just the tip of the iceberg. Don't forget that these contradictions started coming not today. If you recall, the figure the Vice President gave was different from the figure the President himself gave, which in turn was also different from what was contained in the Minister responsible for finances, report on the expenditure on COVID on the floor of the House, which necessitated the formation of a bipartisan committee to investigate that matter. That figure is also different from what the Auditor General has also reported in his report. You have mentioned that of Korea and Germany, in fact, of which some components of these 2 sources were grants. And if you recall, Evans, in 2022, the country director for the World Bank indicated that Ghana was giving about $903 million. Evans, do you recall?
Yes, I recall.
Very well. If you read the Auditor General's report, the amount that has been accounted for is in a region of about $430 million US. So there are a lot, and quite apart from all these figures, we'll look at how judicious these resources was put to. Even, I am sure that from when the Auditor General's report was published, we will all settle the issue of the financial difficulties we find ourselves being attributed to COVID. Because, of course, if you have any competent government and you, in a matter of 2 years, you pump not less than about 22 billion Ghana cedis into your economy, the economy should be booming than collapsing as we see now. And so to the extent that COVID caused sicknesses, COVID killed somebody, it was a disaster. But to the extent that COVID brought us about 22 billion, I think that it pumped a lot into our economy that we shouldn't have been where we are at the moment. You know, so when we sit on the 7th, we are going to look at the correlation between what they use the money for and its intended purpose. If we are to use, and let me even say this before I continue, Evans, what the Auditor General stated in its report was that about $120 million US was used to purchase COVID vaccines, which never came. But what they didn't add is also that, per the records available to the Parliamentary Select Committee on Health, at that material time, other bilaterals had given us a lot of vaccines, for which at the point we had in excess of 5 million doses. Some got expired. So we will have to, and you even recall the issue of Sputnik when the minister even said that he had not paid a farthing to the Sheikh. But later, it was revealed that they had paid some money. You understand? If you have given money for fumigation, the question is, how will fumigation contribute to the fight against COVID? If you have given money to SMEs, who and who benefited from these money that was done out? Even you and I know that there have been some audios, recordings circulating to the effect that there were MPP parliamentary candidates who have confessed that they were giving some amount of money, some constituencies were giving money, parliamentary candidates and what have you.
But you look into that too?
Why not? It is all part of the COVID expenditure.
But that is not substantiated. That is a mere allegation.
Well, so let the person appear before the committee and tell us it's an allegation.
I mean, you first have to establish if even that is the person's voice, because this was a leaked audio, nobody
So
knew.
let the person say so. In fact, indeed, we will have to be interested in who received COVID funds. Are you telling me that you just come and write? Look, Evans, in the year 2021, we all will recall that COVID has subsided, isn't it?
2021, yeah, it went down a bit, yes.
Exactly. Even in the year 2021, we were told that about 32 million Ghana cedis was used on meetings. What kind of meetings? Virtual meetings? Because at the time, there was a ban on traveling outside. We have been told by this same report that we had given about 600,000 out of $4 million dollars for some ambulances. You and I know, and I sit on the health committee, the issue about ambulances is not to procure more ambulances, but the operationalization of the ambulances we have at the moment. That is the issue, where people in emergency situations will have to even cough money for fuel, the maintenance of the ambulances. Now we have paid some amount to some companies, and not an ambulance tie has even been delivered.
Let me ask you, Mr. Kando. The Finance Ministry has a statement out tonight. Part of that statement reads that the expenditure that was done for COVID-19 interventions and for general budget support, quote, is respectively consistent with the mandate approved by Parliament. The Finance Ministry is saying that you approved the spending. So why are you complaining?
So, Evans, if I approve money for you to go and buy PPE, okay, and then you don't use the money for its intended purpose, not until there's auditing and there's such an investigation, how will I know? You come with some intentions for which we think that it's germane, and then we approve money for you, and you go and distribute. Do you ever think, Evans, that Parliament will approve money to go and distribute to party people? We will not.
I mean,
So
but let's be clear, that hasn't been established. You're saying you're going to look
Evans,
into it.
I'm using that as an example. Excuse my language, we will not approve money for any unnecessary spending. We won't do that. So anytime you will come with a plan. You will come with a reason why you think that we should give you a particular amount of money. So it is only in order for you to tell us what you have used that money for. You have even forgotten about the national, COVID trust fund. How much has been accrued, how it was expended, and all that. And so I recall there were some loans at the point we approved and all that. So that is why there is a need for us to investigate all these matters. And then we are all clear in our mind. And don't forget, and let me make this point, that we started insisting on this probe, not today. Insisting on this probe. In fact, in the initial stages, our colleagues on the other side thought that there was absolutely nothing wrong to be investigated. It got to a point, our motion to call for that probe was even thrown off Parliament. At that time, it was the Right Honourable First Deputy Speaker, Joe Osei, who was sitting in the chair. But at least this first Auditor General's report has vindicated our position that indeed there is something to be investigated. And so I think that we must go beyond what the Auditor General has done. We are receiving memoranda. Anybody who has anything to submit or to tell us is welcomed. And so on the 7th, we'll begin sitting in public. And I think that whatever will come out will be for everybody to know.
Yeah, I want to bring in back Dr. Kwame Sapasiru and stay with Mr. Kando. Sapasiru, so I read to you point D in the Finance Ministry statement, and it says the Ministry of Finance coordinated the mobilization and disbursement of funds for the COVID-19 responses by government in accordance with the Public Financial Management Act to ensure timely release of funds to save lives, livelihoods, and property. Isn't this really what the fact is that gives us clarity about what the money was used for and backs the government case that money was used judiciously? Because if you go back to when the COVID started in 2020, going 2021, Ghana's COVID response was one of the best and praised around the world. In fact, I've opened a Brookings Institute report on Ghana that talks about how Ghana was one of the best in terms of testing. Quick, I'm going to quote this. As the reasons is that Ghana has one of the highest testing rates when compared to other African countries, which means, as the finance ministry is saying, they use the money prudently to save lives, and Brookings is attesting to that. I mean, that is clear evidence, right, that the money was used.
Evans, every time I hear a comparison, oh, an African country is the best amongst Africans, you've got to look at the testing rate in Africa. The testing rate in Africa was the lowest. In fact, it wasn't even comparable to Southeast Asia. It was that bad. So if you are the best amongst the worst, and you read a Brookings Institute report to justify that, I find that ludicrous. What happened to comparing us to what was happening in the rest of the world? Because this was a global pandemic. It wasn't an African pandemic. We are not talking about Ebola, are we? We are talking about a global pandemic where people were testing at scale. Why does Africa always want to be treated like paupers? Where we are told we are beggars, so the one who begs least becomes the shining star. That's the first thing. And that's how I discredit the Brookings Institute report. Because if it had compared us to the global test rate, I would have made a statement as a biomedical scientist, because that is my professional bread and butter. But I wouldn't, because it compared us to the worst, and I take exception to that. So that's the first thing. The second thing is, you are talking about the finance ministry saying, I spent the money because it was approved. I spent the money because it was an emergency. What happened to the word due diligence? Do we give people executive position simply to spend in an emergency? And look at it, Evans. You and I were parents. Our kids will fall ill. There are times our kids will be in school and we'll get phone calls that maybe they went to play football or basketball or rugby or whatever sport and have got badly injured. Do you break the bank and destroy your bank account simply because you have to save your son? Or do you say, I've got to save my son and I will do that, but I'll do it out of prudence? And at the initial phase, if it's life and death, I would have an expenditure cap. Moving forward, I would then spend judiciously, but I'll then come and review my expenditure cap to see even if I spent appropriately. The finance ministry do that. Look, don't let us muddy the waters and make this emergency word an albatross.
But it was an emergency, right? And so when lives are at stake,
it was an emergency.
I mean, when lives are at stake, due diligence cannot take precedence over the saving of the life.
No, Evans, that is why I stop you. Would you say that in Singapore? Would you say that in South Korea? Would you say that even in the United Kingdom where I live, where there have been audits of their COVID accounts and where people are being held to account for inappropriate expenditure? Why should we make an exception for Ghana? When would we learn that it's getting to the point where people we put in trust to hold public office on our behalf would have to be prudent and judicious in spending on our behalf. We do not give them a blanket check. We do not go to the ballot box to vote to tell people to spend indiscriminately. Otherwise, we wouldn't have our procurement laws. Otherwise, we wouldn't have our acts of parliament. Otherwise, we wouldn't have our emergency provisions. We have these things because we know they have to be checks and balances. So to just be blanket and blasé, like you asked your question, Evans, I take exception to it. And I don't take exception because to you as a person, but I know you are playing the devil's advocate. But on this occasion, the devil becomes Lucifer, and Lucifer becomes Jesus and has to be crucified on the cross. So I put you on the cross and I crucify you because under the circumstances, you are trying to tell me I have to accept any malicious expenditure and accept the English language that the Ministry of Finance has written and tells me, oh, we are now dealing with the implementing agencies to see and all this gibberish. Meanwhile, the Auditor General, like Daniel Domlevo said before he left, would have given them all this information prior before it became public knowledge. What did they do? Why are they doing this now? Please, don't let us give these people a pass simply because they can write English. Let us hold their legs to the fire. At this point, they have spent our monies badly. They have sent us to the IMF. They've been irresponsible, and we need to call them out. I would call them out.
Let me get Mr. Kando on those two quick points the Finance Ministry says they will do on the back of the revelations. Mr. Kando, the Finance Ministry says they have begun meetings with the respective agencies to implement the Auditor General's recommendations, and then also that they are now putting in place what they call the Emergency Expenditure Management Guidelines that will guide us in spending in times of crisis and emergency, which has been because and again it's almost an admission that because we didn't have these guidelines, of course, then we possibly then were misguided a bit in some of the spending. But let's put this policy in place to guide us next time. Those two interventions, what do you make of them? Do you approve of them? Hello, Mr. Kando.
Hello, Ivan.
Yes, I was just asking very quickly to give me your quick reaction to the Finance Ministry's interventions. 2 action points. 1, getting agencies to implement the Auditor General's report, and 2, drawing up an emergency expenditure management guideline.
Well, whether they do these things or not, my position is that we must go beyond the Auditor General's report. These are, if they will do them, the fact that you don't have emergency whatever guideline doesn't mean that your discretion, you should not, your discretion should not be accurate or should not be right. You are a leader. We can't make laws for almost every activity in this country. But as and when the situation comes, you must take right decisions. You must take right decisions. So somebody must be accountable to the laws to the state. And so for me, we should not just end there, that as though the Auditor General has done, some holy work and therefore that's all, it comes to an end. No, I think we must go beyond what the Auditor General has done. You cannot tell me that you go and give a contract to Enterprise Insurance and people contract virus and they are not paid their insurances. More than 6,000 people, and you say we should end there? We can't do this. We cannot do this. So for me, I think that, in fact, as a result of these committees and investigations, probably at the end of the day as a country, whether with a ministry or parliament, we will have a clear guideline. We will have a clear guideline. But that position, whether we like it or not, Evans, I think that we must go beyond what the Auditor General has done.
Thank you very much, Mr. Kando. Thank you very much, Kwame Sapanasiru, and I'm grateful that you joined me on this. These are very important matters, and we wait to see whether the public hearings is going to be public. So we're going to follow this very closely when Parliament resumes, and that's a bit of work as far as this is concerned, and puts these individuals before the cameras and question them on it. Enjoy the rest of the evening.